What if I told you in knitting that there was one technique where you can beautifully weave in your ends, hide errors, save threadbare knitting, and embellish your color work? Would you think it's magic? Or would you say, Carrie, that's just duplicate stitch? If your answer is the former, this video is for you. So hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, give this video a thumbs up, and learn all about how to do the duplicate stitch. Hello, welcome to my channel. If you are new here, I am Carrie Craft Geek, and this is where I talk about making pretty things with pretty string, usually with two pointy sticks. Although in knitting, we don't just use two pointy sticks. Sometimes we will use a crochet hook, and sometimes we will use one pointy short stick, the tapestry needle. And that is the case with the technique we're going to talk about today, the duplicate stitch. Duplicate stitch is actually an embroidery technique where we use scrap yarns to retrace or duplicate the stitch path that we've already knitted. And it's not hard to do. The trickiest part of doing duplicate stitch really is kind of training your eye to recognize the stitch path that you are trying to duplicate. So in today's video, we're first going to take a look at the anatomy of a stitch so you really understand what you are looking for when you go in to use this embroidery technique. I'll then show you how to do duplicate stitch on the public side of your work for those times you want to cover up a mistake. And then I'll show you how to do it on the private side if you want to use it to weave in your ends. And then finally, we'll take a look at using duplicate stitch in garter because it is not quite the same stitch path in garter as it is in stockinette. And as a bonus, I'll show you a modified duplicate stitch in garter that you can use to weave in your ends. So with all that, let's get stitching. Here's a secret about knitting. Whether you are doing a purl stitch or a knit stitch, the shape of the loop is the same regardless. If I were to take a single row of knitting and isolate those loops, you would see that there was a single undulating wave of yarn. But if I were to take just one segment of that knitted row and isolate it, we would then see the different segments of the stitch. So going from right to left, we have the right running thread, which I think of as looking like a little smile. Then we have the right leg, we have the purl bump, which I think looks like a rainbow. Then we have the left leg, and finally the left running thread, which looks like another little smile. Now, seeing those segments is really easy in a 2D graphic. However, on a 3D object like knitting, the different segments are on different sides of the fabric. So it's really important that you be able to find on which side each of those segments is. So in stockinette, and we can look here at the pink row to see it easily. On one side, we have the right leg and the left leg, and it forms that little V, okay? If I turn the fabric over, this is where we're gonna find your right running thread right there. And then if you follow that up, you'll see that the thread goes underneath this purl bump from the row below, all right? And then there's the purl bump of the stitch that we're looking at, our little rainbow, and you can kind of see it shoots out of running threads from the row above. Then we come back, we follow that rainbow to the other side, right? And down, and right here, we have our left running thread right there. So right running thread, purl bump, left running thread. And if you look at it, right, on the wrong side, it forms a little triangle. The purl bump is the point of the triangle, and the left running thread and the right running thread are the corners of that triangle, okay? So stockinette, it's not too difficult to find your thread path. But what about garter stitch? Well, it's a different fabric. You get purl bumps and running threads on both sides of your fabric, and the legs kind of get hidden right between the ridges of the two rows. Because remember, each ridge represents two rows of knitting in garter stitch. So it can be a little trickier to find all those different segments of your stitch, but we can just focus on what we do see. Well, right here, I have a purl bump, right? Well, I'm going to follow it down and I can stretch my fabric. I can see here's my purl bump, here's my left leg, here's my right leg, and my running threads are on the other side, okay? So here are my 2 running threads of that stitch. So that's the thing about garter. On the stitch, the purl bump will be on one side and your running threads will be on the opposite side. But you can use your knowledge of the anatomy of the stitch to figure out where each one of those segments are. And once you kind of identify where those segments are, you can see where the thread path is. Here we have the Stockinette swatch, and I think Stockinette is probably when people most often think about using duplicate stitch. The thing with duplicate stitch though is you can do it either from the public side or from the private side of your work. So if I'm trying to cover over a mistake or I'm embellishing my work, I'm going to do the duplicate stitch on the right side of the fabric. So let's look at that first. I've got my scrap yarn here already threaded. So I'm gonna find my right leg. Because I'm right-handed, it's easiest for me to do this right to left. But if you're left-handed, you can do this from left to right and start at where the left leg is. All right, and there's the right leg of my stitch. So I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to put it behind the right leg of the stitch on the row below. Okay, and this is embroidery, so we need to pull our yarn and just leave a nice tail to weave in later. Now I'm going to follow that right leg up, and the purl bump is going to be at the top of the leg. So the purl bump is actually right here behind these 2 legs of stitches on the row above. So I'm going to put my needle behind the 2 legs on the row above. Now I'm at my left leg. I'm going to follow that left leg down, and the bottom of the leg is coming out of the stitch on the row below. So I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to put it behind the left leg on the row below. And now I'm just going to do a little bit of futzing so that my new duplicate stitch, this green stitch, the tension matches the stitches around it pretty well. It's really important when you're doing duplicate stitch to try to match the tension of the stitches that you're duplicating. And that's going to help the duplicate stitch be less apparent, right? And boom, I have now covered over the pink stitch. Let's look at that again. So here's my next right leg of the stitches that I'm going to duplicate. So I'm going to bring my needle behind the right stitch on the row below, because that's where my running thread is. I'm going to follow the leg up and bring my needle behind both legs, right? Because the purl bump comes behind both legs. I'm going to follow my left leg down, and it's coming out of here. So I'm going to bring my needle behind the left leg on the row below. Here we go. Now, when you get really good at this, if you know that you're going to duplicate the stitch next to it, you don't have to go 1 stitch at a time. You can take your needle. I'm here at the left leg. I'm going to bring it behind the left leg on the row below. And I'm also going to scoop it underneath the right leg next to it of the next stitch. And that's going to make this even more efficient to do. And once you really got this kind of your eye on this, really like have trained your eye to see this, you won't even think about it. You'll just be like, bloop, 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 bloop. Cover the stitches. And once I wove in all my ends, unless you looked really, really closely, you would never know that these green stitches are in fact covering up pink stitches. So I was doing duplicate stitch on the right side or public side of the work. How about when we want to duplicate stitch on the back of the work? You might go, Carrie, why would I want to duplicate stitch on the back of the work? Well, just so happens to be my favorite way to weave in ends. That's why. If you're finding this video helpful, especially around using duplicate stitch for a finishing technique, I highly recommend this book, The Knitter's Book of Finishing Techniques by Nancy M. Weissman. It's full of great tips and tricks on how to elevate your finished project from good to great, from wow to oh my, yes, you get the idea. I will have this, of course, tagged to this video if you'd like to purchase this. If you shop through one of my tagged products, I might earn a small commission, and this really helps support my channel. So thank you so much for using that extra level of support. So let's look at duplicate stitch on the wrong side. Now, when I look at the wrong side of the work, sometimes it feels like just a sea of bumps. I don't know what I'm looking at, but we always go back to where can we identify a running thread or a purl bump. So here's my right running thread right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow that right running thread through, and it comes underneath this purl bump. And this purl bump is from the row below. So we're going to bring our needle underneath the purl bump that sits between the right running thread and the left running thread. And then, if we kind of scooch our yarn down, oh look, there's my right leg. There it is right there. So we're going to follow that leg up, and it comes underneath this running thread on the row above, right? And the purl bump comes out of the running stitches on the row above. So they're like little clouds at the foot of the rainbow. So we bring our needle underneath the running thread, and we follow the purl bump to this spot, right? This is the left running thread at the end of the purl bump. We're going to go underneath that and down. And then we're going to come right back. And here's the other leg of our stitch we're duplicating. And that comes underneath that purl bump again, right? So we go underneath the purl bump again and down. And now we have covered over the stitch. I'll show you again. We look for the right and left running threads. And between those the right and left running threads is a purl bump. So we're going to bring our needle underneath that purl bump. And then we're going to follow the leg of the stitch that comes here, okay, to this running thread from the row above. Put our needle underneath that running thread. Follow the rainbow to the other running thread. And now we're going to look for that purl bump again that we first came under. We're going to go underneath it again. So when you get used to doing this, you can do a nice smooth motion. I bring my needle underneath the purl bump between the two running threads. I bring it underneath the running thread that's at the end of my purl bump. Pull the yarn through. Follow the bump. Here's my other running thread to bring my needle underneath, back under the purl bump and down. Again, when you're doing this, it's important, especially when you're weaving in ends, to match the size of the stitches that you're duplicating. So you have good tension and it all blends together. So yeah, that's how I do weave in my ends using duplicate stitch. And the reason I love duplicate stitch for weaving in ends is because it follows the same thread path of my actual knitting. That means if you pull and stretch the knitting, the tail just moves with everything beautifully. It doesn't pull at the fabric. There is extra bulk on this side. You can see the extra bulk on the wrong side of the fabric, but on the public side of the fabric, there's no extra bulk. So yes, that is how you can do duplicate stitch on both the public and private side of stockinette stitch. If you are finding this video helpful, don't forget to give it a share. If you really are finding this helpful, give it a hype. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. So it's really good to know how to do duplicate stitch in a variety of situations. You might not be doing a lot of color work in Garter, but you still end up with mistakes. You still end up with split fibers that sometimes you need to reinforce with some duplicate stitch. You still end up with some threadbare knitting over time that maybe you want to reinforce with duplicate stitch. But finding the thread path in Garter can sometimes be a little tricky because, again, the purl bumps and the running
legs are on different sides of the fabric. The legs get hidden in the ridges.
I find when doing duplicate stitch with garter, it's always easier to start with where my running threads are. And so here we are. Here are the running threads, and you can tell because they make the little smiles, you know? So here is my right running thread, and here is my left running thread. So what I'm going to do, just like with stockinette, I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to put it underneath that purl bump that sits between the two running threads just to get me started. But then I'm going to take my needle, I'm going to push it to the front of the work and turn it around because I want to duplicate stitch over the purl bump and hide the purl bumps on this public side of the work. And here's my purl bump, and it's going to sit in between these running threads, right? Just like it looked when we were doing the stockinette. So I'm going to take my needle, I'm going to put it underneath the right running thread that's at the end of my purl bump, at the end of the rainbow. Follow my purl bump down and go underneath the running thread at the other end of the rainbow. In this case, I gotta just be careful, make sure that running thread actually covers over the pink. It just needs to come over on top. So sometimes you gotta just use your needle to nudge the yarn into place. There you go. And now I'm gonna go back down. Here's my left leg.
It's coming out of the stitch on the row below. That's actually where my needle came out of when I started this. So I'm going to put my needle back through that stitch and back to the wrong side of the work where I started.
And there we go. And I have covered that pink yarn with the blue stitch. So it's a little trickier with garter stitch to do this. It's a little trickier to find that thread path, but when you kind of get an eye for it, you start to see how that thread path actually runs. And then if I want to get a little more efficient, I can just take my needle and put it underneath the left leg of the stitch of the row below and then underneath the right leg of the stitch of the row below and get myself positioned. And then underneath the running thread, follow the rainbow to the other running thread. And yeah. So that is how you can do duplicate stitch with garter.
When you want to do repairs or hide mistakes and perfectly match the thread path.
But what about weaving in ends? Would I do this way for weaving in ends? And the answer is no, because there's something really cool about garter stitch and kind of doing a faux duplicate stitch. And so I'm going to show you that bonus tip now. There's something really kind of cool with garter stitch and weaving in ends and doing something that I think of more as a faux duplicate stitch, because
garter stitch kind of creates a faux stitch. Famously, garter stitch has these ridges, and each ridge is made up of 2 rows of knitting. And if you look, the first row of the ridge, you can see the running threads. And on the second row, you can see the purl bumps.
Well, that looks like a regular stitch. So when weaving in ends with garter stitch,
you can follow this faux stitch path.
And it's way easier than trying to duplicate the path for the actual stitches. So let's look at how it's done. Here's my right running thread. I'm going to bring my needle up underneath the purl bump that sits between the running threads. And then I'm going to find my purl bump, the easy purl bump. And there it is. I mean, it's always directly above the purl bump I just came underneath. So here's the purl bump.
So I'm going to bring my needle underneath the right running thread on the row above, follow the purl bump over and bring my needle down underneath the left running thread on the row above, and then bring my needle down underneath the purl bump that sits between the 2 running threads of my faux stitch.
And again, you want to be careful always when you're doing this to weave in ends that you keep your tension kind of matching the tension of the stitches. But yeah, now I've woven in my ends and it looks like a knit stitch, but I'm actually just running the tail across 2 rows of knitting. So here's my next running thread. So
I'll keep doing this faux duplicate stitch until I've woven in, 2 to 3 inches of my tail. And it actually feels like the most natural thing to do in garter stitch is this faux duplicate stitch.
Because it looks like a normal stitch path. By the way, this way of weaving in ends using duplicate stitch and what I call faux duplicate stitch, this is right out of the Master Hand Knitter's manual. Like, this is when you go through level 1 Master Hand Knitting, this is what they expect you to do to weave in your ends. And the great advantage of this again is it's easy to do, it's easy to weave in your ends, and when you stretch and pull at the fabric, that weave just moves with the fabric because it's in the shape of a stitch. And I absolutely love this technique. And I'm so grateful. Like, this is one of the reasons even though I didn't finish it, I'm really glad I did the level 1 Master Hand Knitters course, because I learned this from that. Now today I'm really focusing on how to do duplicate stitch for stockinette and garter, because I think if you can do that successfully, you can start to figure out how to do duplicate stitch in all sorts of situations, like different textured fibers, knit purl combinations, because you'll understand how to follow the thread path, because that's what this all comes down to. However, if you want some more demonstration, I do have a video on how to weave in ends with textured stitches. I will link that up here and down below if you want to check that out to learn more great ways to weave in your ends. So that is how I do duplicate. Well, that's not just how I do duplicate stitch. That's how you do duplicate stitch. One does do, although I don't know, people come up with things. Some good, some bad. People come up with things. But that is how I learned to do duplicate stitch, and I absolutely love this technique. Like I said, I use it in every project, almost every project, because almost every project needs a tail that needs to be woven in, and I almost always use duplicate stitch to some degree. It's just, oh, chef's kiss. If you have any questions about it, or your own experience or tips or tricks with duplicate stitch you'd like to share, please leave those down in the comments below and we can keep this conversation going. I hope that you enjoyed today's video. If so, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with your other yarn wrangling friends. And if you really loved it, give it a hype. That hype, YouTube's new system is to hype videos to help smaller creators be found. So if you can give this video a hype, I just would so greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to learn more about knitting, right about now, a video suggestion is going to pop up and you can click on that and you can keep your knitting journey going. Otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful day, evening, weekend, weeknight, whenever you may be watching this. And as always, happy health and happy making. Bye.